Hello everyone. Today on Big Al Books in studio, we've got a special guest. If you may remember, if you watched, I did the partners tag a few months ago. So this is Taylor, my boyfriend. So here's the situation. So I've been filming a lot of videos over the past few days, kind of gearing up for like the end of year, all the lists and everything. And I've grown really tired of just like talking to myself about myself. You know? So I thought I would bring in another human being to like have more of a conversation to mix things up a bit. So that's what Taylor's doing here today. So we're going to be doing the book Postscript tag. So this is like a tag created by Adam at mementomori. And it's a good overview, some questions about how the year in reading went. And I was tagged to do this by the Poptimist and Sean the Book Maniac, two awesome Canadian booktubers, and I wanted to do this tag before the end of the year, and this should be dropping on the last day of the year. So we're just sliding in at the last minute. So thank you for being with us here today, Taylor. Excited to have you.
Very excited to be here. Hopefully I can contribute to the conversation in an effective way.
All right, cool. This is way too much of an intro, so we are going to get started into the questions. All right, so for the first question, the longest book that you read this year, and the book that took you the longest to finish. How about you start us off?
All right, I'll go first. The longest book I read this year is called After On by Rob Reed, and it is, like 552 pages. So it's not quite as long as some of Alex's longer books, but it's the longest book I read. Very interesting story. It's about the artificial intelligence and the first artificial intelligence to come to life and sort of like a history of that. It's fiction. It's not true, obviously. But that was definitely the longest book I read. And the book that took me the longest to read, I'm cheating on this one a little bit, because normally when I read through things very quickly once I get into it. So I'm going to cheat on this one a little bit. It's something I haven't finished yet. It's called Seven Eves by Neil Stevenson. And I'm cheating because I actually haven't finished it yet. I've been reading it for a few months now, and I haven't quite got it hooked, and I haven't actually finished it yet. So if I were to finish it, it will be the book that took me the longest to read when I eventually finish reading it.
Are you going to finish reading it?
I definitely will. I am interested in it, and for one thing or another, I lose my momentum, and I don't quite get through it.
You kind of need to get hooked right away.
Yes,
if Taylor gets hooked, then he will burn through books quicker than I can, I think.
Well, I did get hooked. I told you, it was one of my favorite starts of a story, of a book ever. It has one of my favorite first sentences ever. What is it here? It says, "The moon blew up without warning and for no apparent reason." And that's the way the book starts. And that hooked me.
Fair.
And for whatever reason, I didn't quite get through it.
It's a pretty solid opening. For me, I expected my longest book to be Barkskins by Annie Proulx, which is a long book about multiple generations of families that cut down trees in New France, in early Canada, because this was just like the biggest bulk size according to volume. But actually by page count, the longest book that I read was Bone, the collected series. This one is clocking in at, it's like 1,300 pages, but I also feel like it doesn't necessarily count because it's like a cartoon, so it's a lot quicker of a read. It's not as dense as a book. But the longest book with like words that I read was The Second Sex by Simone de Beauvoir, which is actually longer than Barkskins. This one is about 770 pages, all about sexism in the world and gender dynamics and existential philosophy. So
I got the whole rundown on the book without actually reading it, so I feel like I have.
Yeah, my mind was blown when I started reading this book. I was like seeing the world differently, and Taylor had to go through that experience with me. And this one was also the book that took me the longest to finish. I did start it in the summer, and it was like a lot to take in, so then I took a few months off, and then I went hard in Nonfiction November and finished this sucker off. So yeah, that would be my longest read this year. Question number 2 is a book you read in 2018 that was outside of your comfort zone.
All right, now I'm going to cheat a little bit with this one too, because I didn't read the entire book because it was too far out of my comfort zone. But it's a book of short stories by Thomas Ligotti called Songs of a Dead Dreamer, and this is Alex's book. She recommended one story to me. She mentioned it was really scary and really, really unsettling or something like that. And so naturally I wanted to figure out what was so unsettling about it. And it's outside of my comfort zone because I don't like being scared. I don't watch scary movies. I don't read scary stories. I don't enjoy being scared, and I'm very susceptible to horror, and I don't do well with it. But
he'll have nightmares for days afterwards.
Yeah, so I went for it anyway, and outside of my comfort zone, I read the first short story in the book called The Frolic. I don't even really know how to describe it other than it was extremely unsettling, and I did not read the rest of the short story, so I guess that explains it enough.
Yeah. Honestly, like, Tom Sligotti is, like, more, like, existential horror. And that was the first story in his first short story collection. And that one was, like, the most, like, traditional scary story in the whole thing. So actually the rest of them weren't even as scary. They're more scary on, like, a cosmic level. Not as much a, like, someone's gonna come in my house and, like, take my kid kind of level. Speaking of which, though, to your comfort zone, I just read Fever Dream by Samantha Schweblin the other night while you were not here in one sitting, and this was, like, totally freaked me out. So I actually want to force this one on you next. It was a pretty terrifying read. So if you want to continue pushing that comfort zone, I hope that maybe you'll give this one a try, too.
We'll see.
My answer for this question is a book called Blood and Guts in High School. I don't know where I should hold this. So this is by Kathy Acker, and it kind of shows up on a list of, like, weird postmodern books. So, like, I knew going into it that it was going to be weird, and it was still, like, too weird and, like, too much for me. So when this book starts off, it's about a girl, Janie, and she's, like, 12 years old and is having this, like, relationship with her dad. So that was, like, really, that was a bad start to the book. Like, it's super uncomfortable and, like, very physically descriptive, and then she ends up, like, leaving home and going on the streets and doing drugs, and she ends up as a sex slave. It's real dark. So, like, I knew that this book was going to be weird and hard to handle, and it was still, like, too much out of my comfort zone. And then also it will do stuff like this, like dream maps that don't make, like, any sense. So this was just a mess. It was, like, it's too out there for me, which is saying something.
That is true.
Question number 3 is, how many books did you reread in 2018?
Well, for me, I have a harder time tracking this. I don't really have the Goodreads page to track the books that I read each year.
Amateur.
She's been trying to get me to. I think I set it up a year ago, or a couple of years ago. It's got, like, 3 of the books that I've written on it.
Takes, like, 5 seconds.
Yeah.
You can even scan the books now.
Anyway, I don't have one, so I was trying to remember. I might be missing something. I don't think I am. The one thing I remember rereading is the comic series Lock and Key by Joe Hill and Gabriel Rodriguez. So if you count each issue of the comic series, I've reread 6 books.
Oh, that's like a snake. That's a snaky move.
Well, they count as 6 books on Goodreads, right?
Yeah.
So I think that if I did have a Goodreads account, it would say that I reread 6 books.
So you reread 6 books in, like, one night.
Yeah, it was in one night. Lock and Key, really enjoyed it. I'd read it in the past, very freaky. And normally I reread Why the Last Man every year, which is another graphic novel series. I guess I didn't get around to it this year, so maybe I'll have to do that this coming week or so I can still get it in.
Do you think I'd like Lock and Key? Should I read that one?
I mean, when I was reading it, it was so that you would read it as well and we would talk about it.
Whoops.
And then for some reason, you got busy with something else. So you had said that you wanted to read it, and that's why I reread it. I think you would like it.
Awkward. Okay, well, 2019. So I reread 11 books this year, which was pretty good because my goal at the start of the year was to reread 1 book every month. So I didn't quite make it to 12, but on average, not too bad. Because, you know, I find you have to prioritize rereading or it will never happen. Because there's so many other books to read.
So many to-be-reads on the bookshelf.
Yeah, you know, the TBR life. So there were a few different reasons why I reread books, too. So just to quickly go through what I reread this year. There were a few books that I had to reread for school because I was teaching them. So I had to reread Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank, which was, like, so much more heart-crushing than the first time I read it when I was 12. When I was 12, I was like, yeah, fine. But this time I was like, this is actually... It was a tough one for me. I also had to read The Glass Castle by Jeanette Walls. Again, another book that I wasn't crazy about the first time that I read, but was more favorable about the second time around. And my students who read it all had really great discussions. So it was a good book to use in the classroom. We've mentioned this book a lot on my channel. Romeo and Juliet, the only play that I ever get to teach. So yeah, reread that one a few times this year. And then I also had to reread one of my arch nemesis. That is Lord of the Flies by William Golding. I hated this book in grade 10. So then when I taught grade 10 English all these years later, they're still teaching this thing. And I still don't like it. It didn't change. No? I maybe appreciate it a little bit more, but no, it's still not a book that I really enjoy. And then I reread The Tempest for when we went to see it live. So that was fine. Again, I never like The Tempest as much as I expect that I'm going to. I think partly because of the ending, it just sort of like...
You've mentioned that a few times, that you expect to
in
like it
theory, I love The Tempest. And then in the reality of reading the play, I'm just like, And then, so those were the books that, like, I read because, like, I had reasons. Then I wanted to reread a few of my favorite books. I was, like, brushing up on that, seeing are they still my favorites. So the first one that I reread was 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. After I read The House of the Spirits, which I thought was, like, kind of like a pale version of this. So I had to read the OG, and I still loved it. Then this summer, I reread To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf. Absolutely loved it. I also reread my favorite book, The Master and Margarita, for the third time. Still perfection. Absolutely loved it. And then I reread a few books that I remember reading like 5 years ago that I didn't like then, and I wanted to give them another chance with mixed results. So the first one was The Secret History by Donna Tartt, which I liked less, I think, my second time through. But I don't know if it was just in a weird time when I was reading it. But yeah, this book kind of bothered me, actually, more than it did the first time that I read it. And then I'm going to save these next two, for the next question, which is, what was your favorite reread of 2018? So you've kind of answered this.
My favorite reread of 2018 was Lock and Key.
Is there a particular issue or is there a volume of that one that is better than all the other ones?
I really like the first one, I think. It really sets the tone nicely. I mean, they're all very interesting. So I sat and read them in one sitting, basically, so it's hard for me to really kind of separate them in my mind. But that was easily, far and away my favorite reread of 2018.
Tough competition. Yeah. So for me, I had two. I couldn't pick between them because I had such a grand time rereading both of these books. So the first one was The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. So again, I read this book the same year that I read The Secret History. It was my first year of university, like right around when I just started school. And I did not like this book. I thought it was quite boring. And I was expecting it to be very scandalous for the time because I was like, this guy's so dark, he has no soul, he's gonna do all these, like, crazy things. And, like, Victorian novels, you can't really show all the crazy things that they're doing. It's more, like, veiled references to opium dens and stuff. So this time, going into it, I, like, knew what I was expecting. So I loved it. Yeah. I absolutely loved it. This book is, like, awesome, and it's now one of my all-time favorite Victorian novels. I got so into it. You know that, because I was, like, I was just loving my life when I was reading this book. Yeah. So I thought it was great. So that was definitely one of my top rereads of the year. And the other book that I just enjoyed to pieces, you know what's coming, Anne of Green Gables by Lucy Maud Montgomery. This is like the Canadian classic. So this is a book I read when I was a kid. And I had it marked, this is scandalous right here, I had it marked as 2 stars on Goodreads. So I guess I thought that it was like, this book's overrated. Because everyone's obsessed with it, and it's just like about a stupid kid and whatever, it's fine. But I reread it this year, and like I lived for it.
Yes, and I got a lot of Anne quotes. Randomly.
Yeah, I was writing down quotes like all the time. Everything was just, it was so good, and I appreciated it on like another level. We talked about this in my last wrap up, but like the adult characters in this novel really came to life for me the second time around. So I loved it. Now my Goodreads rating is at a 5-star.
Wow,
So that was
big
like
jump.
a huge shift. So I feel like I was an idiot before. I was wrong. There's a reason this book is so popular. I think the copy that I have has an afterword by Margaret Atwood. And even she mentions it's kind of annoying that it's so good because, like, you don't want to like the things that everyone else does, like, because it's so overdone here in the Canada. So you don't want to love it, but you can't help it because it's, like, it's too damn good. And also, now Taylor has been dragged into this situation because we are watching a recent TV adaptation of it that is on Netflix. And we've only watched the first episode, but what did you think of it?
Absolutely loved it. I mean, it helps that Alex is like grinning ear to ear and giggling the entire time.
Well, also, it's an emotional roller coaster.
It is.
It's not all fun and
and
games.
Yes.
They're really discussing the trauma that Anne has as an orphan, being displaced for so many years.
Yeah, no, it's far more dramatic than I recall. I remember it was read to me, and like my 3rd grade teacher read it to us. And there's more drama going on than I recall. But Anne is a very exciting character, interesting character, and she reminds me a lot of someone who I really like. So I very much have been enjoying watching the show. So
yeah, that's how we're going to spend the rest of our Christmas holiday, low-key. I mean, also doing other cool things, but also hunkering down and watching some Anne of Green Gables. Question number 5. A book you read for the first time in 2018 that you look forward to rereading in the future.
Okay, well, for me, mine is called Sleepover by H.G. Wells. And so this is...
Is that like H.G. Wells, but not?
I don't really know. I didn't look that much into it.
Well, because like H.G. Wells is like a really big
I know who H.G. Wells is.
But like that has to be a joke, right? Like that's not the real person's name. H.G. Bells.
I don't know. I didn't look that much
into it. And it's a book about like alarm clocks, and his name is Bells.
It's not about alarm clocks.
I mean, like it looks like an alarm clock.
Well, let me explain what it's about, and that'll explain why it looks like an alarm clock.
And I'm just gonna die in the corner silently over H.G. Bells. Like I can't pick a different initial.
H.G. Bells.
You can be H. Bells. We can't be H.G. Bells. Okay.
Right. Well, H.G. Bells wrote a book that I very much enjoyed, that I really liked. It's called Sleepover, and so that's why it has the alarm clock style print. It's if everyone in the world stopped being able to sleep all at the same time. And it sounds kind of silly, but it was very intense at parts and very insane, because imagine going like days, weeks, months without sleeping, and the society, how it collapses and stuff. And it's written in the same way that a World War Z, where it's a bunch of different, it's an oral history of the apocalypse. So it's a bunch of different stories from around the world and the people, how they dealt with it. And I've really enjoyed it, and it's something I will definitely read again. Despite people's protests on the matter.
It sounds like that could be written by H.G. Wells. If he
Well,
writes about, like, invisible people in time machines, he would totally...
Well, it's written by H.G. Bells.
Okay. My answer for this question is a bit more serious. I went in a more...
Well, mine is really serious.
I guess
a lot
so.
of intense stuff
Yeah, I don't
happened.
know what
There
I'm
was,
saying.
like,
I'm just laughing
and
still because of H.G. Bells.
We'll get past it, because it was very
I don't
intense
think I
and very
can,
good.
guys. I'm going to keep cracking up throughout this whole video because that's the most ridiculous thing that I've ever heard. Okay, so moving along. I don't want to get, like, sidetracked by this. It's too late, but okay. Moving along. My answer was Metamorphoses by Ovid, who is a Roman poet. I absolutely loved it. And the reason that I think it's going to be something that I continue to reread is that this collection is based on Greek myths that are very famous throughout Western literature. So, like, a lot of the stories in this are referenced in other works. So it's good to have, like, a good foundational understanding of these. So, like, you'll see, like, they show up all the time in, like, Shakespeare and all this other stuff. So I think that reading them once isn't really enough. You have to kind of really know these stories inside and out. So that's why. Also, it's just enjoyable because these are just, like, all the best stories in one place. This is such a good deal. It's, like, all the awesome stories from Greek mythology of people transforming into crazy things, and then it's put all together in a fun narrative. Like, this is the best. So, like, I will reread it again because I love it, and because it's actually useful. It helps you appreciate other references. So, big win. Question number 6. Favorite single short story or novella that you read in 2018?
All right. Well, we have a bit of a shared answer, which you'll talk about more, our shared answer. So my own individual answer is, it's called One More Thing, Stories and Other Stories by B.J. Novak. He's a comedian, right? So it's mostly humorous stories. And some of them are only like one page or less than a page.
Back here.
Pictures back
Ryan
here, yeah.
from The Office. It's
Yes.
my point of reference.
Yes, exactly. And so some of them are longer, some of them are like only one page, but I found them very, very funny. I was reading it in the car while we were doing like a road trip, and I kept wanting to read them aloud to Alex, which she wasn't as interested in that as me. But I really enjoyed it. My favorite was probably the Comedy Central roast of Nelson Mandela, which it's exactly what it sounds like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This question is about one single short story.
Oh, well, the one single short story would probably be the Comedy Central roast of Nelson Mandela.
That's one heck of a title.
It catches the eye.
Yeah.
Yes, and it lives up to the promise.
So our favorite shared short story that we read this year came from this little collection, Hark the Herald Angels Scream. I just want you to appreciate that cover in all of its glory, because this was a cover buy for me.
Yeah, well, it's probably the thumbnail for this video, so.
So these are a bunch of scary short stories, like Christmas related.
Mm-hmm.
But the story that I read in here, I totally wasn't expecting it, because everything else is kind of like creepy and ominous. And then there's one story in here that was just like so funny that I read it when I was home alone and I was like crying. It was very good. It's called Good Deeds. And it's by Jeff Strand, who I'd never heard of before all of this, but I will need to look into him now because this was so funny. And it's basically based by the holiday song Christmas Shoes.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what it's called?
Christmas Shoes, yeah.
Yeah, so it kind of takes the premise of Christmas shoes about a boy who can't afford to buy shoes for his dying mother, who's dying of cancer at Christmas time. And it's about the man who helps this boy pay for the shoes and how good he feels about himself after he helps him buy the shoes. And he goes home and he writes a song about how inspired he is. And then that song is released into the world, and like a lot of bad things happen then.
How inspired he is by himself.
Yeah.
For what he did.
Yeah, it's very much not it's kind of about how smug the song is, like how self-congratulatory it is about like the charity that he did at Christmas. So that story was really funny. And then I made Taylor read it.
And you can tell it was really funny because Alex was telling me how funny it was and was like watching me while I read it.
I wasn't.
But sitting right beside me while I read it, and I still laughed and I still enjoyed it, which shows how funny it really is if you can enjoy it when someone is standing over your shoulder waiting for you to laugh. And I still did. So
yeah. It just like, I don't think either of us are like super sentimental, so we really enjoyed roasting that Christmas Shoes song. Even though we have a lot of relatives who like played it at this Christmas that they think it's so beautiful and they were crying and we're like thinking of the story. So that was really funny. But I also had some serious answers for this as well. So that was like my favorite by far, because that's like my new holiday tradition is going to be reading that song and feeling great. But I wanted to pick a novella that I read this year that I absolutely loved, was Bartleby the Scrivener by Herman Melville, which he wrote Moby Dick, which is a lot longer than this one. So this was a nice introduction for me to Herman Melville. And this is about a guy who works on Wall Street as a scrivener, and he goes to work and he just starts saying that he would prefer not to when he's asked to do things. And that's like a beautiful approach to life, I think.
Yeah.
You know, your boss tells you to do something, I would prefer not to. You know, he's not rude to anyone. He's not causing a scene. He just, like, he doesn't want to. And I feel that way a lot, too. So I liked that. And then my favorite short story that I read came from this collection, Fortune Smiles by Adam Johnson, which was an overall, like, really strong short story collection. There were a lot of great ones in here. But the one that I really liked was called Dark Meadow. And it was actually pretty disturbing. So it was a story about a man who is kind of into child pornography, but it also stems from his own trauma from a child being abused. So, like, he's very aware how wrong it is, and he knows that it's a problem. Like, he has these pedophilic tendencies. He knows that he's dangerous, and it was kind of, like, about, like, his life and a particular incident that happened. And basically, he has to decide, like, is he going to work with the police to try to, like, catch people who are, like, selling these illegal materials. And it was like, I really like stories that make you uncomfortable and take a stand on like a complicated issue. So like, instead of just like villainizing someone, because we all know child pornography is bad, it would be easy to just like make him this horrible person, but to actually give him kind of a more complex backstory and to not just demonize someone like that was very intriguing. And it was just very like creepy and suspenseful, but like gave me a lot to think about, and I'm still haunted a bit by this story.
Well, if he likes things that make you uncomfortable, it sounds like that would be it.
Yeah, it definitely gives you a lot to think about. So actually, this whole collection's great, but that story has really stuck with me. All right, question number 7, mass appeal. A book you liked and would recommend to a wide variety of readers.
Okay. Well, for mine actually comes as a recommendation. So once again, shout out Uncle Rob. I mentioned him the last time I was on, and this is a recommendation from him, and I've since recommended to a bunch of people. It is called Sleeping Giants. It's book 1 of a trilogy of the Themis Files by Sylvain Neuvel, I think is how you would pronounce that. Sylvain Neuvel. I apologize.
Wow.
Anyway, it is a sci-fi fantasy story about finding this giant robot on planet Earth and sort of the implications of that, where it came from and all of that. And it's told through conversations and interviews with the different people involved in the story. So there's not like any descriptive writing or prose. It's all dialogue or journal entries and things like that. And I've recommended to a few people who have already read it and enjoyed it. It's one of those books that you start reading it and you don't put it down until you're done. Unputdownable, I think, is how it's described on the cover.
Would you say that this would be good for people who don't traditionally go for SFF?
I mean, I do traditionally go for it, so it's hard for me to say. I think you might. But
like, do you think this would be a good, if someone's thinking, like, I want to read some more speculative fiction, like, would you hand this one as, like, this is a good way to get into that genre?
Definitely. I mean, the first book and the second book especially really, I think, cover the issue of what's happening in, like, a realistic way and the implications across the planet, and sort of what's happening from there. So it is sort of like a, speculative fiction, where it's, like, figuring out what would happen if this happened. I think it does a pretty good job of that. So it's my mass appeal recommendation. So yes, I agree.
Cool. So mine, the first thing that came to my mind was, like, Saga, because everyone who reads this one seems to like it, for the most part, and there are a lot of people who are reading this one. So for, like, graphic novels. But then I was thinking it's also not great because it's, like, very inappropriate at times. So it's not for everyone. Like, I wouldn't go recommend this to, like, students or something, because, like, there's a lot of graphic situations, swearing, violence. But, like, if you're, like, an adult and, like, you're okay with that, then I think that there's, like, such a great story and such a cool world in Saga that it would be great for a lot of people. Also, I think everyone should read it so that they can meet Goose, the axe-wielding seal, who is so cute in overalls. So, like, yeah, Goose is, like, the best thing that's happened to me in life. So I discovered him in Saga. So for that reason, I would say, like, mass appeal. Like, who doesn't like this? Why would you not want this in your life? So I was thinking Saga. And then I also went, like, a different direction for this as well. And I was thinking about There There by Tommy Orange, which was a debut novel that came out this summer that was, like, crazy hyped. And this is by an Indigenous author. And it's kind of about the urban experience. So it takes place over a few different narratives, and all these characters are coming together for a powwow. So I thought this would be a good book for people who, like, have never read any fiction from an Indigenous perspective, because I think that it's very, like, eases the reader in and explains a lot of the history and gives context to why the history matters in the present day. So I thought this would be a good book if you're, like, looking to get into that. And I think it's, like, accessible enough that a lot of people would like it. And it's multiple narrative perspectives. So I think there's going to be at least, like, one voice in this text that you would find and kind of like reading about, hopefully. So I wanted to use this as a way to segue into the next question, which is called Specialized Appeal. So now we're doing the opposite. A book you liked but would be hesitant to recommend to just anyone. So There would kind of be a book that I'd say for people who are, like, looking to, like, start reading books from an Indigenous perspective. But then I was thinking of this nonfiction book that I read, As We Have Always Done, Indigenous Freedom Through Radical Resistance, by Leanne Bedesamasake Simpson, who is a Mishi-Sagig Anishinaabe author from parts of Northern Ontario. So this, to me, is the opposite of There There by Tommy Orange. So, like, this is a book designed for people who don't know anything about the violence of settler colonialism and will, like, explain it to you. Whereas this is, like, very much the opposite, where the author is not writing for a settler audience in mind. which I thought was like it was a very interesting experience, especially since there are kind of moments in this book that are very like blatant about settlers being a problem in Canada and like not being wanted here, sort of, to put it bluntly, that I feel like a lot of readers would be put off by this kind of book because people want really like nice answers, I think, especially in Canada. We talk about reconciliation a lot. We want everyone to get along. Like, what's the solution going forward? And this book is really like, basically, as long as settlers are continuing to take land away from Indigenous people, there can be no way forward because so much of their life and their language and their traditions and culture is based in the land and interacting in meaningful ways with the land. So it was not like a optimistic kind of view. It was a great book, but you can't just give this to everyone because they'd be like real rattled, basically.
Well, it sounds like very fair points to me.
Yeah, but I think I was basically just thinking about the difference. Indigenous authors basically who will write more accessible books that will take in anyone, and Indigenous authors who are not willing to do that and who use their language in their books. And you're going to miss some of the meaning. Yeah. But that's not necessarily designed for you. So I think it's cool that there are both camps of writers who are doing both of those things. And that's why it's important to read widely.
Yeah, it was an extremely important point of view that, like you're saying, it doesn't come through all that often. So it's nice to have a book that does have that point of view where it's not all, let's all be best friends and we can totally...
Yeah, I would pick this.
Right away.
Yeah, so this would be very specialized, I would say. You have to have the right frame of mind going into this or you're going to come out very offended. For this question, I was also thinking, like, mostly everything that I read is, like, pretty weird a lot of the time. So I wouldn't just go around recommending everything that I read to every person, since, like, a lot of what I like is, like, stuff that I find, like, weirdly funny, which is, like, specific to me. One of the examples of that, I thought, was this one, The Incantations of Daniel Johnson. So this, to me, is, like, a very specific... It's kind of like a graphic novel that's based on the life of indie singer-songwriter Daniel Johnson. So, like, you kind of... I feel like you should be a Daniel Johnson fan to, like, get the most out of this. And, like, there aren't a lot of us out there in the world, you know? He's a very, he's an acquired taste. Let's just... I don't think... Have you heard him?
I have no idea who you're talking about.
Okay, you would know.
I don't know
if you heard him. Let's just say you would know. He's got a very, like, iconic style of singing.
True love will find you in the end.
So this, to me, was, like, just very, like, weird, non-linear depiction of his life and his struggles with mental illness, and it was beautiful, and I absolutely loved it, but I would not give this to anyone. Also, you know this, at the end of the book, it curses the reader, which really rattled me, you know, in the summer. I was just like, my book just put a curse on my life. So that's why I would also, like, you can't recommend this to people. You can't spread the curse on. So don't read this book. Like, live your lives. Enjoy them. I can't enjoy mine anymore. I've cursed. It's over for me. But the rest of you. Anyway, so that was also, like, specialized.
Well, hopefully I'm not attached to the curse.
No, just don't read it.
Okay, then we're fine.
Don't look at it. It's gone.
I'm sort of the opposite direction than you on this. I recommend almost everything I read to everyone, even if I really shouldn't be. And, like, I'll recommend this weird sci-fi space stuff to, like, my grandma. Just because if I enjoy it, I just think everyone should try it because it was really great. But one book for me that, again, outside of that, it's called Weapons of Math Destruction by Kathy O'Neill. And it's about how big data increases inequality and threatens democracy. So we talk about how big data is so important. You can learn so much about the world and society through big data, and this sort of breaks that down to how big data can be manipulated or be misinterpreted in a way where it's trying to get rid of inequality, but really it's just reinforcing it in a lot of ways. And the reason why I wouldn't recommend this to a lot of people is it is very math heavy, and it is very...
I'm out!
I think I did try to recommend it to you, and it was a tragic failure in doing so. It is very math heavy, and it is very, like, talk about equations and breaking down things. So I wouldn't recommend it to everyone, but if you're interested in math and you don't mind reading nonfiction that is very heavy in the language, I would really recommend it. It was very interesting. It's one of those books where you turn, like, hey, did you know? And try to, like, share it even though she's trying to read something else and doesn't care, which is sort of my pattern, is disrupting her when she's trying to read other things.
Coming to think of it, I don't think I've ever read a book that has math in the title.
I'm sure you have.
I don't think so.
You've read all
I
of
think
those.
that is a deal breaker for me. Math? No, not happening. Anyway, question number 9. Reflect on your year as a bookish content creator. Goals met, good bad memories, favorite videos you made, etc. So, not as relevant for you.
As a bookish content creator myself, being in 2 videos now, I feel like this is my favorite video, the best video I did. The last one was probably the worst, but also the second best. I enjoyed it as well. I enjoyed the experience both times I've been invited on. Hope to be in the future sometime as well.
Did you have a favorite video that I did this year?
Outside of the one that I was in?
Yes.
My favorite was probably the Victorian award one. What was it called?
The Victober Fight Club.
Victober Fight Club. That was probably my favorite. I did laugh to myself several times watching that, especially with the 1,000,000 points to Joe and Great Expectations.
Yeah, that was funny because that was actually my answer too. I feel like that was like the video that I was happiest with that I made this year because it was like so random. Like I was just sitting at home thinking like, what if I had a fight club? And I just really made stuff up on the go. It was very spur of the moment, but I had a lot of fun making that video. And that's kind of why I do this channel.
Yes. Your content is very you. Like when I watch it, you do come through a lot. But that was probably the most you that's come through because it was just so weird and random and just completely out of your brain.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed that one.
Yeah, I'm always kind of torn on this channel, whether, like, should I be somewhat professional because, like, I am a teacher and, you know, like, people could find this, you know, this is out there on the internet, but then also part of me is, like, a huge goofball, and I do also like communicating that, so it's kind of a bit of a contrast, so I think what we see on this channel is, like, those two forces.
Yeah, it's a little taste. I'll sometimes hear her do a few takes where she gets a little less angry or a little less aggressive with each take.
And it's like, let me try to say that again in a less alienating way.
So it starts up here and she brings it down to about here. So
I have strong opinions.
Yeah.
No, I was pretty happy being on BookTube this year.
Yeah.
This is my second year. And yeah, I'm happy that I'm doing it. I didn't do as many review videos this year. So I would say that was something that I'd like to maybe try to fix, but those do take a lot of time, and I'm kind of always like scraping on. I feel like, you know, if I get a wrap up video done like in a month, I'm just like, yeah. So I you know, I always want to be filming more, but it's sometimes hard to find time for that. All right, and that takes us to our 10th and final question, which is tag some fellow bookish content creators. So I'm actually not going to do that because this video is going to be dropping on on December 31st, which is the last day of the year. So it's too late. Is essentially how I feel about it. Like, so like, you know, no one can really, I can't tag anyone and get them to do it in 2018. I feel like it's totally fine to do this tag in January still. But like, I feel like this has gone around a lot. People know about it. If you haven't done it, do it. Drag a person that you know to come do it with you. It's a fun way to try it. But yeah, I'm not going to tag anyone specific, but if you're watching and you want to do this, just do it.
Sounds good.
All right, cool. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great New Year's. That's what's coming up.
Thank you for having me, letting me on.
Yeah.
Again.
Yes. All right. Bye.